When you first got on stage, the very first time you got on stage, I know you told me about Apache, you told me about Tampa. Tell me about the very first time you got on stage and how did you feel? Take me to that process of how you felt being on stage for the first time.
Yeah, very first time I got on stage, it was in Nashville. It was at Kajiji's Coffee House.
Oh, that was the first?
In
Oh,
Nashville,
okay.
Tennessee. Yeah, so shout out to them. I think a lot of poets in Nashville really kind of came up in that era at Kijiji. So that was the first time I ever got on stage, and it was interesting because I was nowhere near as nervous there, even though it was my first time ever, as I was at Apache. And I had performed in Nashville at open mic several times before I got there. But there was something about what was created at Kajiji's. It was like familial. It was very comfortable. People were extremely supportive. And so I had the opportunity to see people like Afropic, who I was amazed at her ability to seamlessly go between poems and the intros and the segues, right? Just how she would just do a poem and how she would intro it, talk in between and do whatever. So I'm looking at that aspect of it. And then I'm looking at people like Logic in the Third Person, who was a technical writer. Like, he was a beast with the bars. And so when you look, it was like, okay, he really understands the writing process in the English language. And then there were people like Aubrey, who had the emotional tie-in. So he knew how to engage the crowd from an emotional standpoint and do so. It was like, it were all those things. It didn't matter if you were first time, if you knew what you were doing, if you were reading from your phones, if it was whatever, like, it was all love, like, all the time. And I think that it was just, I wasn't even really nervous, right? Because I had done I was a nerd. I did public speaking in school. I was on the debate team. I was on the forensics team. I was performing already. I was just performing other people's shit. You know what I mean? Like, this was the first time that I'm performing something of my own. So there was a little bit of anxiety associated with that. But I did the poem. I got off. And then afterwards, a couple of people came up to me and they was like, wow, that poem is really, really dope. Do you have it anywhere? Like, I think my sister needs to hear this, and my girlfriend needs to hear this, and you know what I mean, or whatever. And I was like, wow, this is just some shit that I wrote because it's what I was feeling. I never thought that anybody had any real interest in it. And that was it. Like, that was the point where I was like, okay, like, now I want to continue to do this and kind of do this more. So, yeah.
That's dope. When the people you was breaking down, out of all the places you've been, of course, outside of this, not Georgia, we already know there's monsters here. Where was the place you've been and you just seen people and it's like, whoa, this level of talent is really good for poetry?
Yeah, I mean, I can't even, it's difficult for me to pick a specific place. One, because I've been a lot of different places, and I've seen like a lot of I was in Miami with back when Will the Real One, rest in peace, was there, and where you have the youngster who's Bertrand Boyd now that are there, like, and so I know that. I was in Tampa with Life and with a lot of people that were there. I was in Orlando when Bailey B was there and when Ambrose Cavender was there, you know what I mean? So it's like, when I go to all of these, I was in DC and in New York and New Jersey, so it's all of these places where I can pick to specific individuals. I think the first place I saw Talam AC was in Tampa, even though he's from Jersey, he's from the Northeast. So it's difficult for me to say. I would just say that I have been extremely blessed in being able to be exposed to all of these other artists. If you live in Atlanta, I feel like you're spoiled. You know what I mean? Just because you have such an amalgamation of dope artists that are there. But I never would have been able to see, a Life or a Talam or a Bertrand or a Wilder, like none of those people, if I had never been to any of those other cities.
Would you mind texting me some of those names? I know Talam, but the other people name, can you text me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't mind looking them up and just seeing their poetry.
Yeah, I said Devery Brooks, The Word Problem out of Orlando. Like, yeah, it's just, Orlando is where I first met Kyla, she was the rising phoenix then, but now obviously she's Kyla, and you know, she's in Atlanta now. So yeah, it's been an amazing experience for me just to be able to be exposed to all of those different artists. So.
Yeah. When did you think like, all right, I figured this out, I understand it?
I still don't.
You still don't?
I've done a lot of shit. I've done a lot. I've accomplished a lot. I've performed a lot. I'm doing a lot of my own things with, you know, the trip and the show and everything else. But I still don't quite think that I figured out, because I think that there's so much more to do.
Oh,
right?
it is.
I look at, like I said, I look at what Brandon has done there. I look at what Prentice Powell, you know, has done in, you know, performing on Arsenio Hall, and you know,
he bodied that shit
right,
too.
and like a lot of other places. I look at what, you know, somebody like Masterpiece has done, where she has, you know, done poetry, but then she's gone off and spun that out into her own fitness brand, right? That she's branded herself to be able to do all these other things. I look at, you know, folks like Talam. And even Queen Sheba, right, who is now, and Brandon Alexander Williamson, who has taken poetry, and they are now professors, right? They're professing at college institutions, and you know, I look at all of those things. I'm like, I don't have it figured out yet, right? I look at Teresa the Songbird, who's done a one-woman show, like all of these
I gotta
things.
see that, bro.
Like,
I had a feature that day. I want to see
like
that.
all of those things, all of these things that I want to do, like I've figured out certain aspects of it. Right, but I don't have it figured out by any stretch of the imagination.
I'm not talking about the business portion of it. I'm talking about more so like, you don't think your stage prep and your pen, you figure that part out. And we always get better.
Yeah.
But you don't think when you're on stage?
I think I figured it out for me, right? Which I think is important. And I think that's what a lot of poets struggle with, right? Is finding out what does good look like for them, like what is their lane, instead of trying to be, you know, somebody else or do something, right? Because like I said, I grew up with poets that I admired and that I saw. Like I got to see Sonny Patterson, I got to see Talam, I got to see Life, I got to see, you know, all of these people that I wanted to pattern myself after, and I had to figure out where my lane was. I think for me, it really kind of went back to like basics, right? So yeah, I'm a little bit of a nerd. So when I started looking at poetry,
Let me say this to you. That nerd shit, to when I hear nerd, when I was younger and I heard nerd,
I'm wearing a badge of honor now.
I already said it. When I hear nerd,
I don't say it in a derogatory
Okay.
manner. And what? So no, I don't say it in a derogatory.
A lot of motherfuckers need to be nerds, bro.
Yeah, no, I mean,
nerd just means to me just knowing information that most people don't know, or knowing more than most people. That's what nerd mean to me. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, you're good. I mean, I say all the time that I feel like that I'm a repository of sometimes useless information. I just know a lot of shit that I would probably never use at any other point in life, but I just know it, right? So it's just, hey.
My wife like that. She knows stuff that I'll be like, yo.
Right.
And if I say, yo, I don't know how to spell this word, she'll spell it. I'll be like,
it's
you know, it's not one word you ever didn't spell right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think for me, when I figured it out was when I took a step back and I decided to break down the differences or the stages for me in my poetic progression, right? And so what I realized is I said, there is a difference between a writer and an author. A writer, you have to understand the English language. You have to understand subject-verb agreement. You have to understand, you know, all of those things in order to be able to write statements or whatever the case may be. As an author, you take that knowledge of writing, of the English language, and you turn that into the ability to craft it into telling a story, right? So you're now able to convey a story and take your reader through certain emotions or things through the printed page. And then there's a difference between an author and a poet, because poets are authors in the sense that they are telling these stories, right? But they also have to understand the English language. They're now telling these stories, but they're telling it in a flow, in a cadence, in a manner that has, you know, kind of like this wave to it that's associated with it. And then there's a difference between a poet and a spoken word artist, because when you're a spoken word artist, you are now saying, hey, I have to understand subject-verb agreement, I have to be able to tell a story. I have to be able to not only tell a story, but do it in a cadence, in a fashion that has a rhythm or something to it. And now I am doing it, I am performing it, right? I am now speaking it to you, so it's not the printed page, and it's now my responsibility to be able to bring those things to life in a performance aspect. And when I broke it down to those things, and I realized where I was in each of those things, because there were a lot of times that I thought that I was a spoken word artist and I was a poet, right? I was reciting poems instead of performing them. And that's why when I first started doing, like poems or whatever, like I would say, all the time, whether it be somebody deciding to say rewind, or somebody saying like, I really liked that poem, The Truth. Can you do the part where it's the Pythagorean theorem? And then I would be like, I don't care if it's, I don't mind being A squared as long as I would B squared, as long as the world will C squared. I'll be able to do it at that point because I knew the poems that well. I was that comfortable with them in that instance. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, now I figured it out for me. Now I'm a spoken word artist because I know how to bring my words to life. I know how to write. I understand, how to put them together, how to write. I understand what my cadence is. Everybody's cadence is different. And now I understand how to take that cadence and how to take all of these different emotions, all the different poems, and bring them to life in that manner. And it was at that point, right, that I was like, okay, now I got it. Because I had a bunch of dope poems. I had 2 CDs out before I became a spoken word artist. I was performing a lot, doing a lot of shows before I became a spoken word artist. And it wasn't until I became an artist and I recognized the difference in those things that I really feel like I got it for me.
The way you just broke that down, right? You ever think about doing a class? Because you're a proud nerd. You know how to break things down from different perspectives, and you can do it in layman terms. Well, I'm sure you can go high level if you wanted to. You ever think about doing a class, breaking those type of things down? Because I'm sure it's a lot of courses on the scene, and they don't know that it's those levels of things that you broke down.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't. You know what I mean? Because honestly, like I said, for a lot of things, like with the whole theory of the compelling event, like a lot of things, I do it for me, like for my own understanding and benefit. No, I get it. Okay. Yeah, what I haven't, to answer your question, what I haven't sat down and done is I haven't sat down and looked at how do I take this information, this knowledge that I know that I've learned, and turn it into curriculum, right? Turn it into something that is cohesive, and that someone can follow and kind of go from there. That's what I have not done. It's that I do that for work like all the time, but I hadn't thought to say, yes, here's all this information, here's all this stuff these people can benefit from, and instead of having,
it might be a dope book,
right? Instead of having casual conversations between someone and explaining it in that fashion, put some structure to it and turn it into a curriculum. So now
you should think about that because it could be done from my thought process. It could be done. It could be done. Let's go back. We talked about your mother a little bit. We talked about your father a little bit. But break down what type of person your mother was. Break down the people that lived in your house. Break them down like what type of people they were. Because the man that's standing for me seemed like a good man, right? So break down the morals and just the things they taught you.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the biggest thing is that I was fortunate enough.
And when I say seem like, that wasn't a shot.
Yeah, no, it's cool. Okay. It's cool. I don't take it that way. I think the big thing is I was fortunate enough that for the first portion of the earlier years of my life, I did grow up in a 2-parent household. Mm-hmm. So my mother and father, were there. So I did see that, even though the portions of the relationship were estranged to some degree. I did at least have a father in the household who was, all about being a man, being a provider, being a disciplinarian, being all of those things. And I had a mother, in the household who was about being matriarch, right? She cooked, I had home cooked meals, she cleaned, she did our laundry, all of those things. So I think that it was beneficial to me to be able to have that, and that had a lot to do with my perspective in the world kind of growing up. In addition to that, I grew up in a very religious household. So my parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. So I grew up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh.
So I, so there are certain things just from a moral and ethical, standpoint or whatever that was instilled in me, that some of which I carry today. I don't still practice, but some of which I still understand. But I think that it did have a very large impact, on that. And so you take my father, who is a man's man, a disciplinarian, not the type of guy that's going to be like, hey, son, I love you. He's going to be like, don't cry, suck it up. And you have my mother, who is the opposite of that, who's like, love you, want you to be the greatest, and all of those things. The other interesting thing, though, was that, they were both dichotomies, right? My father was one that said, hey, if we as a family are $1,000 in debt, and Friday night, we're hungry, we just kind of want to chill and have a nice family day, then we're gonna go. We got some fish sticks and some pot pies in the freezer. That's what we're gonna do, right? My mother is like, hey, it's Friday. We've had a rough week. We're $1,000 in debt. What's $20 more for a pizza, right? I want to splurge for the pizza. You know what I mean? I'm gonna get that now. We're $1,020 in debt. Where if we had done what my dad would done, instead of being $1,020, we would have been $980, because we'd have taken that $20 we would have spent and did that, right? So there were those contradictions and those conflicts that existed. Both of which, right? Like I grew up and I see sort of certain aspects I took from my dad from that, certain aspects I took from my mom. But that's really kind of where, some of the dichotomy in me started to come, right? I started to see that they loved each other, but there were just some fundamental differences in ideas that they kind of had in life, right? And so then I had my older brother, who was kind of like the, he was kind of like the guinea pig, right? Mm-hmm. So it was interesting because he was the older one, he's the firstborn, so he was the one that not got everything, but he was the one that was taught everything, right? My mother taught him how to cook. My father tried to teach him the trade, like, hey, I'm a plumber, come out with me, do these things, cut the grass, whatever the case may be. My older brother was not into manual labor whatsoever, you know what I mean? And he wasn't in the school, either, and my mother was, so there was that interesting thing, is that he was kind of there, and he experienced all those things first. So because I was the second, I didn't get that type of attention from being the firstborn, right? So it's interesting because my older brother was the oldest, my younger brother is the youngest, and my sister is the only girl. So everybody had their own unique aspect in the family except for me. I'm just the middle child, right? I'm the second of three boys. I'm not, what I mean? And so I probably grew up with that middle child syndrome, right? Like looking and wanting for the attention and affection that everybody else got for whatever their special reason was. Mm-hmm. But my older brother, was that, and then he became, somewhat of the advisor, I guess, so as he got older and as he saw the world, he was like, look, here's how the real world works, because we live in this confined area of, being with the family and this religious construct, which kind of shields us from a lot. So he really kind of helped me a lot there. But the difference that I saw was in education. School wasn't his thing, school was mine. I excelled, in school. It was easy for me. It was almost too easy because I grew up in the inner city, right? So those schools, by definition, are already behind. Mm-hmm. I tested out in the 5th grade. I tested out and I had the ability to go to a magnet school. So I went to magnet school for 3 years. So I went from, being in an inner city school to, in the 5th grade, taking a 9-week rotation of 4 different languages, right? So I took 9 weeks of Latin, Spanish, French, and German. Right, so I did that, and then in the 6th grade, you had to pick a language that you would learn for the next 3 years, and I chose French, right? So now I'm in this environment that is all about learning. I'm learning foreign languages. It's a much more diverse environment. I see Polish people and German people and white people and people from China and people from Thailand. I didn't even know what Thailand was, back then, or whatever. And then, long story short, in the 7th grade, I got in trouble because I told a bunch of kids who were in a play after school, I was like, yo, don't go home. Let's just stay at the school and chill. And then once we stayed at the school, we left. I was like, let's go. So we left and we roamed the neighborhood, got pizza, went to the gas station or whatever the case may be. Well, the magnet school was in the middle of the projects. And so when we got back, the principal was like, yo, where have y'all been? Obviously, we've been roaming around, in the hood of the city. Mm-hmm. She was upset. I was the ringleader. And so she was like, she brought my mom in. She's like, yo, he's in trouble. Tell him that after the play, this was on a Friday. She's like, after the play, come in on Monday and he'll get his punishment. So I come in on Monday and I'm like, what's my punishment? And the teacher's like, and the principal's like, I ain't got time to deal with that. I don't remember that. Go to class. So I come home and my mom's like, so what was your punishment? This lady done yelled at me. She done did all this other stuff because you was a badass kid. What's your punishment? I'm like, she didn't give me one. She just told me to go to class. My mom was livid, so she was like, nah, like you should be disciplined for the things that you do. So she pulled me out of that school, out of the magnet school at the time, and put me back in regular school. And so what ended up happening was, I'll never forget, books like The Animal Farm and The Pearl and Beowulf, like all of those things were things that I read in the 5th and 6th grade. I am now trying to be taught those in the 11th and 12th grade, right? So now I'm back in the inner city school. They're like, hey, we're going to read Animal Farm, like I read that in the 5th grade, right? So high school was extremely easy for me. So I would do my second period work in first period, my third period work in second period, and do that. And then because my father was sick, I had a job. So I worked at Ponderosa. So I would be in school.
I remember Ponderosa.
Yeah, I worked at school from 8 to 3, and I'd be at Ponderosa, and I work at Ponderosa from 4 to 9. And like that's kind of what I did throughout my high school years. But I saw education basically as my escape. So without even trying, I graduated second in my class, and then got a full ride to Tennessee State. And then I went to Tennessee State or whatever. So my older brother he kind of showed me I was the intelligent one who took school, and then my sister followed after me. And so we were all 2 years apart. So when my brother was a senior, I was a sophomore. And then when I was a senior, my sister was a sophomore. And so in her, she was also loved school as well. And she went to Tennessee State, behind me. And my younger brother is the younger brother, right? He's the kid that gets away with everything, never does anything wrong, gets to do all the shit that we got our ass beat for because that's what it is. So yeah, that's really kind of the structure of everybody that was in my household.
Let me ask you this,
Yeah,
because you said some shit. How did it help you going to that other school, the magnet school? How did that help your thought process? Seeing that being a nerd or knowing information was actually you was being praised for this.
Yeah, the first thing it did was it gave me visibility and access outside of Nashville, which I think was the most important thing. Like, I grew up in the inner city. So in kindergarten,